Hey kids, have you heard the news? You can forget the war on drugs. War on terror, well, that's old news. Move over, war on crime. War on poverty, don't make me laugh. That's right, America has a whole new war for a whole new generation. Welcome to the War on Extremism. Last year, Attorney General of the United States William Barr released a memo announcing the organization of a task force to combat violent extremism in the USA. These efforts have continued with the new administration, and last month Joe Biden released a comprehensive plan to identify and counter extremists. The United States Department of Defense is also making efforts to identify and crack down on extremists in the US military, and the Department of Homeland Security just released a bulletin warning the public about the threats of violent extremists. So, don't get me wrong, this all sounds great, believe me. I'm all for another war on something in America. I mean, all those other wars on things we had, those worked out really great, right? Those were just brilliant successes. But I just have one small question, if you don't mind me asking, before we jump into this whole war on extremism thing. What exactly is extremism? I mean, this is a war we're talking about. The first rule of war is you gotta know your enemy, right? You gotta know what you're up against. So, okay, I guess this 32-page report on extremism that Joe Biden just put out should be a good place to start, right? I mean, there's got to be a nice concrete definition of extremism in this 32-page report on extremism, right? Oh, there's not. But hold on, wait. Neither does Bill Barr's memo on extremism, organizing a task force on extremism. There's no definition of extremism there. Neither does the Department of Defense's training materials on extremism. Neither does the FBI. Actually, nobody seems to have a concrete definition of extremism. That's awkward. It looks like we accidentally started another war on something without defining it. Looks like we have another war on a vague, undefined concept. We've had a lot of those. But you know, they do give plenty of examples of extremism in these materials, right? So I guess we'll just have to sort of infer what is meant by extremism from those examples. So let's take a look. Yeah, see Attorney General William Barr's memo on creating that anti-extremist task force. It stated, we have evidence that anti-government violent extremists, including those who support the Boogaloo, those who self-identify as Antifa and others, will pose continuing threats of lawlessness. The United States military officially claims that neo-Nazis, socialists, and anarchists are all terrorist ideologies and military police training materials. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, a bipartisan national security think tank, includes white supremacists and anti-fascists in its classification of extremists. Biden's report lists far-right militias and white supremacists who want to murder non-whites as extremists, as well as anarchists who oppose capitalism and corporate globalization. Okay, so yeah, a pattern is definitely emerging here. Extremism seems to encompass white supremacists on the far right who want to install a white nationalist government and commit mass genocide, along with anarchists and anti-fascists who want to stop them from doing that. Okay, it's all starting to feel a little bit like extremism is just doctrinal language that is used to lump fascists and anti-fascists in with each other so that the perception of a false equivalency can be permeated throughout the population. Why would they want to do that? Okay, so this is really nothing new. In fact, lately I've been forcing my way through Jericho, a 2006 TV show. It might be the most mediocre television show in history. It's brought to us by John Turteltaub, the director of Cool Runnings and Three Ninjas, but not Three Ninjas Kick Back. In this show, major cities across the United States have been destroyed by nuclear bombs, and spoiler warning, that's right, it was those rascally extremists. They're at it again.
As most of you know, a shipment of nukes from Project Red Bell is missing. What you don't know is that we have quality intel that those warheads have been converted into 25 small, high-yield devices. These bombs have been disseminated to extremist cells active within the United States.
So is this Al-Qaeda?
I wish it were that simple. It's much larger than that. It's a cross-section of domestic militia, anarchists, and religious fanatics. As you can see, these are terrorists that would never collaborate ideologically or politically. The only thing that links them is the desire to take down the federal government.
I mean, you know how much far-right religious zealots and right-wing militias love joining forces with anarchists to nuke the United States of America. They do that all the time. We're constantly joining forces. It's like a buddy cop show, you know? It's like, you know, we got a lot in common after all. When you think about it, we should join forces and nuke America. That's how extremism works. We're just so goddamn extreme. You know, growing up in the 90s, extreme never really felt like a bad word at all, but I guess that's mostly because they dropped the E and used it to sell me nachos and refined sugar products.
Introducing Extreme Jell-O Gel Sticks.
Extreme Nachos, new from Taco Bell.
Fruity Pebbles Extreme!
Introducing new Danimals Extreme Berry Avalanche. With flavor so extreme, it'll get you.
But of course, that core idea behind extremism, that conflate and conquer strategy of taking two wildly different and opposing political movements and sort of smooshing them together to stoke sentiment against them both, well, that's been around for a long, long time, but it really kicked into high gear with the rise of fascism in the 20th century. The fascists themselves have always been experts of this conflation strategy. After all, the Third Reich conflated Jewish people with every imaginable enemy of the German people. They concocted an elaborate false narrative about a vast Jewish conspiracy to undermine and overthrow German society. And this conflationary sort of conspiracy spinning, of course, lives on to this day in fascist circles, manifesting itself in complicated lore involving QAnon, Pizzagate, and the deep state to convince paranoid bigots that all their imagined enemies are working together. But that kind of conspiratorial conflation strategy is not really what we're seeing today with the rise of the war on extremism. This is an entirely different branch of conflation propaganda. It is essentially a manifestation of horseshoe theory. And here to tell us all about horseshoe theory, allow me to introduce the big-time equine. He's the cantering comrade. Ladies and germs, with us all the way from Breadville, put your hands together for Glue the Horse! Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, and thank you for that introduction, EJ. Hey, that's a nice beard you got there. It's got more patches than an EA game. Oh, hey, everybody. Let me tell you, I just flew in from Breadville, and boy, is my stick tired. Ooh, tough crowd. Blue, I told you can't test out your new material on my video essay audience. Just tell them about horseshoe theory, okay? Okay, fine. Horseshoe theory is the idea that far-left politics and far-right politics closely resemble each other. Proponents of horseshoe theory would have you believe that any political movement taken to extremes leads to the same outcome. According to horseshoe theory, there is no difference between anarchism, communism, fascism, and any other political ideology that goes beyond mainstream acceptability, and they are all thus functionally identical. Thus, the political ideal is a centrist position of preserving the status quo and balancing the two sides of a political spectrum. When I say sides and political spectrum, you got to imagine that I'm doing finger quotes there, for I haven't any arms. But seriously, did you know that Ed Sheeran is a big proponent of horseshoe theory? No, seriously, he is. He's in love with the shape of you. Wow. Glue the horse, everybody. Glue the horse. Okay, so it's pretty obvious that this whole idea of extremism that's being pushed on us by the United States government and by capitalist media is just a new iteration of horseshoe theory. After all, Joe Biden himself is a hardline, dyed-in-the-wool neoliberal centrist, a blue dog Democrat who has been working hand in glove with corporate Republicans for decades to maintain the status quo and keep his rich buddies in power. Because here's the thing about centrism in the USA. It is absolutely in no uncertain terms, in and of itself, a violent extremist ideology. It just so happens to also be the ideology of the people who currently hold all the power, and they do everything they can to normalize their extremist positions. And it's a strategy that has worked so well that most Americans are thoroughly indoctrinated into this extremist ideology without even knowing that they have any ideology at all. I mean, seriously, maintaining this illusion that the USA is a land of peace, justice, and freedom requires Archie Bunker levels of cognitive dissonance. And yes, here's a clip of Archie Bunker, since 90% of my audience probably didn't get that reference.
Boy, oh boy, and you're the one who's always preaching law and order.
That is for the criminals, little guile. Law and order should not ruin the lives of law-abiding people. That stupid law of prohibition they had in the old days. The gangsters had to go out there and open up speakeasies so a decent guy could raise a glass.
This American brand of cognitive dissonance is perfectly exemplified by Joe Biden claiming that the United States was founded on the idea that we're all created equal to celebrate the 4th of July. You know, that day in history when a bunch of rich jerks who literally owned human slaves got together to sign the Declaration of Independence? Frederick Douglass addressed this cognitive dissonance powerfully, writing, "To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony." And it takes hella cognitive dissonance to pretend that this institution of slavery hasn't carried on to this day, whether you're talking about the sweatshops of the global South, driving profits for American capitalist imperialists, the slave labor of the for-profit prison system, or the virtual slavery of migrant workers and starvation wage, minimum wage laborers who currently make up at least 60% of the domestic workforce of the USA. This violent extremist ideology is so deeply ingrained into our society that we don't even have a name for it. And this ideology demands that we take for granted that the United States federal government has a right not only to hold power over us, but to wage war and drone strike civilians and stage coups around the world without oversight in our name. This ideology, this extremist, violent ideology, demands that we uphold the quote-unquote founding fathers of the United States as heroes. Men who enslaved and raped black people and waged genocidal war against the indigenous peoples they displaced. Men who explicitly built an oligarchy of white landholding aristocracy and restricted the vote not just from enslaved people and from women, but even from the white working class, in order to, in the words of James Madison, protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. This ideology demands that we view the United States of America as a bastion of freedom, while it houses the largest per capita prison population on Earth by a wide margin, and spends so much money on policing that law enforcement in the USA has a budget equivalent to being the 3rd largest military on Earth. This extremist ideology demands that we simply accept that just 3 families now own more than half the wealth of the bottom 50% of the country, that 1 in 7 Americans rely on food shelters to survive, that over 600,000 Americans so far have died of COVID, that hundreds of thousands of Americans are homeless when we have 6 times as many empty houses as there are homeless people. This violent extremist ideology demands that we look past the 2 million civilians who were murdered in Vietnam by American-led forces, the millions of Agent Orange victims from that war in that country, the at least 500,000 civilians who have died as a result of our invasion of the Middle East, and all the other victims of the American war machine. This violent extremist ideology demands that we accept the fates of the indigenous people whom we've committed genocide on for centuries, who even now are dying at twice the rate of white people from COVID-19 in the USA, and of black people who have lost 3 years from their lifespans due to COVID-19, who are daily shot down by the police and imprisoned and forced into labor by America's prison industrial slavery complex, and all the other victims of the American state. This violent extremist ideology demands that we simply accept the global system of capitalist imperialism, which has devastated countless nations in the global South, and which is destroying our planet with the waste and pollution that comes with the inherent inefficiency and greed of a predatory and exploitative economic system. And we as Americans are so thoroughly indoctrinated by this ideology that, again, we don't even have a name for it. Most Americans who subscribe to this ideology don't even think of themselves as having any ideology at all. This is how thoroughly brainwashed the adherents of this nameless ideology truly are. The United States of America, driven forth by this violent extremist ideology, has killed and injured and imprisoned countless millions upon millions upon millions of people, but very few Americans see this ideology, which they share, as extremist violence at all. It's not even an ideology. Right now, a lot of powerful people are working together to convince you that anyone who challenges this extremist ideology of this violent status quo of the United States is themselves a violent threat. Facebook has begun serving users with a prompt that asks if they are worried that someone they know might be becoming an extremist. Others are being notified that they may have been exposed to extremist content. And remember, this isn't just because of Nazi or fascist content. This is because they're being exposed to anti-fascist content. Individuals have been kicked off the platform, as well as groups, for opposing fascism, including CrimethInc, It's Going Down, and me, because I made a post in which I said fascism is bad. Yeah, I got kicked off of Facebook for being anti-fascist. I didn't call for violence. I didn't say anything calling for any kind of activities that would be illegal. I just opposed fascism and got kicked off of Facebook for that. In short, this new war on extremism is a DARVO tactic in which the most abusive and murderous institution in history, the capitalist state that we call the United States of America, flatly denies its own abuses, attacks anyone who would challenge its own hegemony, and reverses victim and offender such that we who oppose fascism are portrayed as just as bad as the fascists whom we oppose. And I will leave you now on this 4th of July with the words of Martin Luther King Jr., who wrote, "The question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice?" Happy Independence Day.